upon us is a real treat. Hey, Momo, how we doing?
What's going on?
A lot, or maybe about to be a lot. Everybody's going crazy up here. I know you get it. You've been among the dialed-in reporters who have all said the Warriors are knocking on every important door. So where does it sit? Let's start with Paul George. How likely of a scenario do you see that one as?
I mean, I had somebody pretty close to this describe this is more of a long shot, just because it's complicated, right? And, the Clippers, they don't have to do anything. They can just sit back and kind of dare him to leave. If they know their guy and they think he really just wants to stay in LA or stay on the West Coast, they don't have to trade him anywhere. The only thing that gets a little weird is if he opts in, and then we'll know that by Saturday, right? That's the opt-in day, the 29th. So if he opts in, then you go, well, that's kind of interesting. He can still do the extension with the Clippers. Then he kind of comes off the board for the cap space teams, unless they do a sign-in trade there. But I think it's a really, I think the Warriors obviously have interest in that. They're trying to surround Steph and Draymond and whoever else is left, right, with talent, and give Steph. It's really, I say Steph and Draymond, but it's Steph, right? As long as you have Steph, you got to give him a roster that's not going to finish 10th and begin to play in every year.
If we do get to that sign and trade portion of the show, is the Chris Paul contract still live in the trade game for a team like the Clippers or another team that might be looking to bring that in as either an asset or as a contract?
I think that's still live. There's a lot of teams that now have to figure out where they are money-wise, right? Now the draft is done, the trades that have happened and not happened, still an attractive contract. Plus, I think Chris Paul can still kind of play. That's the thing. I think the Warriors would like to have Chris Paul back. I just don't know if they can do $30 million again. But there's a set of scenarios where they can extend him out. They can extend the deadline that they have to do that. It would take his agreement on that. But they can, they have the luxury of time here. They don't have to do it right in the next day or two.
Ramona, if we go with the source that you sort of mentioned, that the Paul George idea is complicated and a bit of a long shot, to what level is there a pivot? And what other possibilities at a high level are out there?
I think they just have to keep working at it, right? Like, how can I phrase this? I think there is a pivot. I think that there are still a lot of players out there. Whether or not they fit what the Warriors do, I'm not sure. Right? You'll hear a Brandon Ingram's name out there. Well, it didn't really work out on the Olympic team with Steve Kerr, right? So I don't know about that one. Okay. But there's still a lot of really good players that they can go target, and none of it has to be done now. I just keep coming back to that. It doesn't all have to be done in the next 2 days. It can take a minute, and I think that's an interesting wrinkle here, right? Because there's the Klay Thompson situation. I think that'll get settled fairly quickly, whether he stays in Golden State or goes. I used to think he was definitely staying. Now I'm not so sure. Just based on how this whole thing has gone and how other offers he may have, but there's there's guys like KCP out there that are interesting. They don't have the cap space for that, but they do have young players that people like, and I don't think they have to trade all of them to even get good players. I think there's a lot of options for the Warriors, and that's not easy to do in today's NBA, is to leave yourself this many options.
Ramona, why do you think the Klay Thompson thing happens quickly, and why are you less confident in a return?
There are only a couple teams with the cap space, right, to sign him to something like a little larger. And I think the cap space dries up pretty quick, right? There's only a couple teams that would fit there. And then everything else would be sort of a mid-level, right? So there's not much to decide except for where you want to go. the Warriors. I think the Warriors do have an interest in bringing him back, but what is that is that happening before they deal with the other 4 or 5 options that are out there? I don't see that. I think they have a few other things to try to get done that may or may not happen, right, before they deal with Klay. And let's see how long he waits.
And the timing of it's fascinating because I think the Chris Paul money becomes guaranteed tomorrow. So you'd mentioned that they don't have to do anything right away, but don't they have to essentially have a good idea of what they can do with Chris Paul's contract if, in fact, they guarantee it tomorrow?
Yes, except they could, if I understand this correctly, I think they can extend that deadline if he agrees. He would have to agree. But if I'm Chris Paul, I think I would agree. I think, if there's a chance I still get to make $30 million next year, heck yeah, I'm going to agree. It makes sense, right?
Ramona Shelburne, ESPN, with us here. Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. What would you say collectively about the Warriors' young assets and the Warriors' willingness to include them in current talks?
I would say Kuminga. Everybody asked for Kuminga and Podziemski, and the Warriors say no. Like they don't want to include those 2 young guys in any trades. Now, is there a trade that could move that needle? I'm sure there is. There's Giannis or something, right? But it's pretty close to untouchable. In terms of Kuminga and to some extent Podziemski.
We've heard reports that the team is, quote, aggressively shopping Andrew Wiggins. Are there aggressive buyers? And what do you think the market is to acquire Andrew Wiggins this year?
It's not that high, right? He had a pretty bad season. And he actually has a pretty good contract, in terms of if you think that he can bounce back and have another good year, his contract is not too bad. So I think there is a market. It's just not something that it should have been based off of where he was a couple of years ago. It's hard to. There's not a lot of people clamoring for that right now. That's just a salary match, and there's several years left on that, so that's a tougher one to do. And I think a lot of teams also, there's just not a lot of players in that salary range right now. You know what I mean? You're either a max or you're a mid-level guy. But there's not a lot in between, and so you have to aggregate things. You have to put things together. And my head doesn't fit all this information yet, but they did something today that with their 52nd pick where they traded it and then they got it back, and then now I think they're first and second apron or something, and I don't know what that means yet. I haven't called Bobby or read enough of the breakdown, but I think they made it a little harder on themselves by doing that.
Yeah, what? By the way, they did. They're hard cap now, second apron. What? And again, I heard what you said. You haven't done the
I don't know.
Doesn't it seem at least like that makes large scale moves less likely?
Yes, before the new year. But again, I'm not the right person to ask. You got to call like Nate Duncan or something for that. Call Nate or call Bobby or something. This new cap is new for all of us, and I don't know exactly. I keep hearing it's coming, but it hasn't hit yet.
Right.
And it's the new year, and it's all that stuff.
Ramona Shelburne, ESPN, with us here on 95.7 The Game. Ramona, I want to go back to your comment about moves for the Warriors don't have to happen now. And sort of explore more what you mean by that. Like, is this something that you're thinking, if it's not now, this could be trade deadline stuff? What are you saying there?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I think Golden State has done is they've really preserved optionality for as long as they can. And when you have a player like Wiggins, where his value is pretty low right now, I mean, I suppose we could go lower, but most likely it's going to rebound a bit. When you have younger players like Moody, who, if Klay Thompson is not back, then I think Moody plays a bigger role, and he's a really good player. So they don't have to be in a huge hurry here. I just don't understand everything that happened with the second apron yet, so I can't. Right? It seemed like a thing that they did today, following all the people who were talking about which pick goes where and who traded this, and then. All I know is Bobby Marks tweeted that they invoked the first and second apron things, and that's not good.
Right, and probably good for Joe Lacob because now I was telling Mark there's no more temptation to overspend and get in above that second apron. Now they absolutely can't do that. As far as trade targets, do you think that they might eventually be in that second and third tier and maybe trying to acquire multiple players who are maybe not top of the marquee, but guys who can come in and be at least rotational and maybe making about $20 million?
Yeah, I mean that's really the new NBA. I mean, if you look at the last two teams that won, it's not. I mean, look, Jokic and Murray are great, Tatum and Brown are great, but are outside of Jokic clearly is a top 5 player in the league, but are the other ones? You know, like it used to be like you had to have 2 or 3 like top 5 players, and now it's you got to have a squad. It's about the whole team, and I think that's kind of new, and the depth matters. Now, let's go all the way back to strength and numbers Warriors. Like, obviously, obviously they know that. And that's how they've won a lot of titles, but they also had Steph Curry and Klay Thompson at that point. But I think top to bottom, they just need more offense out of anybody not named Steph. I mean, that was the takeaway from last year, right? And one of. It just can't be Curry versus everybody every night. And is Kuminga there yet? I don't know. When will he get there? Hard to say. It's time to fortify that second scorer role.
Ramona, I wonder also, just based on what you're saying to us right now, like, what do you think the likelihood is that the Warriors come back in October with a roster that looks pretty similar to what they've already got?
I think there was off-season plans and off-season. Let's factor this in, Mark. You just can't spend as much money on a roster and finish 10th like they did last year.
Right.
You can't do that. And so there's a sense like you got to do something different. Like you've seen what this is. What the year before? What were they? They're still in the play-in tournament. I think they were 8th or 7th or 8th.
Oh, they were
right?
6. They were 6, and they beat the Kings and lost in the second round.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, but either way, like this is way too expensive of a team to be finishing the play-in like they did last year. It's not. That can't continue. So, how big of an overhaul can you do? How much is it about giving other people different roles? How much is it about completely recasting the team? I think they had a lot of different plans. They put A, B, C, D, E, F. Right. I don't know where they are on the plans that might work or not work. Like I said on NBA Today the other day. Name a high profile trade target, a free agent. They've made some calls. Kevin Durant, they've called. Paul George, they've called. Right? I mean, this is where they are. Every big name, Larry Markkinen, they've called. But you can't make other people trade you the players, right? If they don't want to, you can't always find the right match there. So I think it's what can they actually pull off? We'll see. They got a couple of big deadlines coming up starting tomorrow.
You speak of these offseason plans kind of in past tense. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
Well, just because we've gone through the draft now. I guess it's not past tense because the offseason hasn't really started yet outside of the draft. But, every time a moment of leverage goes by, so the Warriors they used a pick, so that's one less asset that they have, right? They use picks, so that's one less thing they can put in a potential deal. That's one point where guys get traded. There weren't any really huge trades besides the McCall Bridges trade before the draft.
Yeah, it seemed like it was somewhat of a quiet draft until today when the Lakers really shocked everyone by going out on a limb and taking Bronny James. What's your takeaway with the Lakers taking LeBron's son? Is it a throwaway pick or like second-round picks, or could he actually maybe be a player someday?
It's really interesting. I don't know if he can be a player. I think Michael Thompson and I were on radio today in LA, and he goes, I think he's kind of like Gary Payton III, Gary Payton II. He's kind of like, he obviously has the genes. He has the basketball IQ, he has the athleticism. Is he going to be an all-time leading scorer? Probably not. But could he be a nice rotational player in the league? Maybe. And I'm on the side okay, yeah, there's nepotism involved here. There, obviously, would he be getting drafted if he wasn't LeBron's son? Probably not. But I don't think there's any harm in taking a late second-round pick flyer on him if it keeps your best player happy, and it's really a nice story for the league, right? I mean, do people get on the Bucks for having Thanasis on the team with Giannis? I mean, I don't know. I think it's pretty cool to have a father and son on the same team like this. And I went through and I looked up number 55 picks overall. Okay, there's two of them that stood out to me. Two. Patty Mills was number 55 overall, and Luis Scola, like back in 2002. So we went pretty far back, last 20 or something years. Interesting, right? Like it's most of the time, this number 55 pick doesn't even make the roster. I think Bronny probably will, or he'll be in the G League for part of the year. But it's a good story. It's giving LeBron what he's kind of always dreamed about. He's talked about this for years. I don't think there's any harm in it. And if there was some guy on their board that was still there at 55 and they passed on him, okay. Maybe there's a Jokic that got picked at 58. Maybe McCullers or something is going to be great, right? But I don't think it's hurting anybody. And I think most of the reaction against this is just people who don't like LeBron.
Is KD staying in Phoenix?
I think so. Yeah, I think this is an ego thing. I don't think Ishbia is ready to move off that yet.
Okay. And what do you think? The Jimmy Butler situation? What's your take on that?
I think he stays in Miami. I don't think he wants to get traded. And he may not do a new deal now. He might just stay there and play it out. But yeah, I feel like he stays. I don't think that moves all that much. The ones that I think will be interesting, the big dominoes really are Paul George and whether he stays. If he leaves the Clippers, that changes the whole Western Conference, right? Depending on where it goes, might change the Eastern Conference. Klay Thompson is a pretty big domino in my world. Contavious Caldwell-Pope. Those three players in terms of free agents that could move or could shake things up. Those three, I think, are that really could change the complexion of the Western Conference we've been watching the last 5-10 years.
Medium dominoes, and I'm fascinated by the Atlanta Hawks because they've got 4 or 5 guys in the $20 million range. Are they going to part with Dejounte Murray or Bogdanovich? Could one of those guys maybe pop free?
It makes sense, right? I mean, I feel like Dejounte is probably the guy because he has more trade value than Trae Young. Trae makes a lot of money, and so it's harder to move that contract. It's not that he's a better player; it's just the contract, and you have to kind of build your team around him. You're not trading for him to be your 5th list best player. You're trading for him to be your 1st or 2nd best player. So I don't know. There's a few other salaries out there that are interesting. Like what does Brooklyn do now? It looks like they're in sort of fire sale mode. Do they find a taker for Ben Simmons? Is that a get out of jail free card for somebody? Is that interesting? Cam Thomas, they have a couple good players on that team that could, Dorian Finney-Smith. Those are good rotation players. I think Dallas is an interesting team to watch. Obviously, they were in the finals, and they're probably one more transaction cycle away from doing what they need. And so it's an interesting. I think this whole thing is this whole next week or so with free agency is. There's a lot of teams that are motivated to do things. Plus, we really don't know what this new CBA is about to do. And I don't know if we'll have the answers in 3 days or 3 months. But it is really forcing teams to draw lines in the sand in ways that they haven't before.
Ramona Shelburne, ESPN. Ramona, we will let you leave us with this. Our audience, obviously filled with tons of Warrior fans. I'll just make this very broad. What would you tell them to sort of expect in the next week, in the next 2-3 weeks?
A great effort to improve the team around Steph. Whether or not it's successful, I don't know. How's that?
That's fair enough. Enough. I
think they owe it to Steph. I really do. I think they feel very strongly they owe that to him.
Yeah. No, that much is clear. I just think all of the talk from those NBA insiders about big game hunting has Warrior fans kind of braced for something big, and I don't know if they're going to get it.
Yeah, they still got to pull it off.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the Knicks were waiting for years and years and years. So what are they going to spend their picks on? What are they going to trade their picks? Which star are they going to get? And at the end of the rainbow was McCall Bridges. Good player. I like it. I like the trade. But, is that what they were thinking all those years? I don't know.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. Yeah. Ramona, thank you. Thank you very much.
You got it, boys.
Okay.
Awesome.
Ramona Shelburne.
As
ESPN.
always. Yeah. Bringing it. The